I mean, yes, I missed.
Okay, you're on
some of
camera.
this.
Oh.
And we can't see it.
Well,
And
we
I'll
can't
get you
see
some
her.
more light.
Yeah.
Do you miss it? No.
Well,
You missed your subject.
That's what Goethe said at the end.
no,
Learning-
because
learning.
you go through, it's, life is a sort of layer cake. You go through different things.
We have to be recorded, so watch it.
Well, people might want to publish my wife's words.
But it hasn't
Now I'm going to
started.
copyright them now.
Every idle word that man shall speak, he shall render an account of it on the day of judgment.
Yeah.
You realize
Well,
that
let's
I'm
hope
going
that's
to
a
do
long
it all
time in
in
the
French,
future.
of course.
Of course, naturellement.
I don't mind.
Every century,
You
somebody
don't
thinks
mind.
right now.
Oh, well.
No, look, prefer.
No,
So where
I'm
live
just
are we now?
I'm
Where's the red
joking.
line?
I'm pretty sure it's a joke.
Well, you will understand most of it.
Why is
Just-
it
just
so crooked? The,
Well, I'm not
Because
quite...
it's facing her. I don't know how to make the camera go the other way.
the-
Oh, I see.
I see.
See if she's straight. Yes, she's straight. So I'm
It's-
going to get another light.
Technology for you.
Thank you, yes.
Can't say a word without it being used against you.
Everything is being recorded.
Yes, I know.
She's wanting, no, I don't know if she wants,
The
but
CIA
we're wanting to
or the-
record her speaking of what she's speaking
In
of.
the United States, you know,
Look at all
if
those.
you
Look at all those
speak
attachments.
on
All
social
his.
media,
all those
if
kinds
Well,
there's
this is-
evidence in court that you get a subpoena about it. There's actually been cases in the United States. Literally every idle word that you speak, you render an account of it, not to wait until the 8th day of judgment to be judged in court.
Do you know-
So with that, I should get permission to record this from everybody who's talking.
In,
It's all right,
in
yeah.
writing.
I'm pretty cool. I'm a pretty cool guy.
Yeah.
Do you know there's these incredible espionage systems where they beam lasers onto windows
That's right.
from a phenomenal distance away. They pick up the vibrations of windows, people talking, and they can listen from.
And not just lip reading. It's the vibration.
It's
not
the
lip
vibration. No,
reading.
it's the vibrations because we're talking while vibrating the window.
That's why Martin says, our son,
I'll say no.
that when he has a very confidential meeting in the Foreign Office, he has to go into a particular sort of room with all sorts of sound.
Voilà.
Obviously,
Yeah,
that's
sound
super.
of things.
And
Merci
a Faraday
beaucoup.
cage,
Right.
inside a Faraday cage as well.
Ça marche. Okay.
Splendid.
And
amazing.
And it's not
Johnson
in your
is still
eyes, so that's
Yeah.
good.
Foreign Minister. And the place was empty, nobody was around. And he said, do you know, do you want to have a look? Because I
Foreign
always wanted to
affairs,
see
and
what
we're
it was
saying
like.
that.
And he took me into that room. And you could feel the weight of, you know, the lead and the, everything was left. It was a very odd thing. Oh, looking into the Durbar court, the Durbar court.
We're making their job easier now.
Speaks of
India and the Indian Empire.
the Empire.
The Empire.
Well, it's things that you don't think about.
No,
I don't
it's-
think about
it's-
it.
Sometimes I thought that.
But they
might
hadn't
have
had
best call the riot police around.
I had
and
a
there was big
payroll,
conversations
let
into my
alone
sister
in
in
real
the
time.
States and
For
introduced
5
words
years.
like
So they
bomb
might
and
say that.
Allah Akbar and that kind of thing.
Well, you're not,
My-
you're not
the streets
joke
will be
about
barricaded
this,
off,
this
but-
is the US, you don't use words like that, you know.
No, my cousin did
And
one
because the government has been
bit
taking
of the
notice
trouble.
of what they're
This
doing.
and
They went across. And then they got
Libya was
proposals.
supplying arms to the IRA and the French intercepted
Bought a
it.
Scottish-
Loaded with weapons and
That was pretty much how-
Anyway, my cousin
Anyway, sorry, you were saying.
Margaret, and she was on holiday to France and
No.
coming back to
Well,
Dublin and-
apparently,
and
if you
Charles de
were
Gaulle and sort of the security
in the
you know,
past, so you
got
could
everything in the suitcase and she said there's a bomb. But
you'd be sent
that
off for a
machine
year
was
and
there.
deliver the
Well, she
family.
was very lucky she wasn't put in jail.
None of your
Yeah,
responsibilities. Just
Who-
you're
Sophie,
there, you live with the
No,
family,
Messi.
you learn
Yeah.
about the places like
Thank you.
Gold.
Did that.
You learn the language.
Who's missing?
But they don't, I don't think
Margot
they do
and
anything.
Zakia
I just
are-
don't think long
went
term,
to,
you just think you
bed.
can,
But they both got
rock up and speak English.
And Anna?
I had
Anna went to
my
get
daughter in Yemen.
Oh,
I
she
got a
went to
recording
get
of a
tea.
meeting she was
Yeah.
at.
Yeah.
So you got
Please
top
stop.
stars.
She has the tea bag,
British
she
ambassador.
just needed the cup.
And
Yeah,
it was when they were
yeah.
trying
The water's right here.
Yeah.
I I showed
Oh, no,
that
no,
to a friend
regular.
of ours who lives across the road, who's a retired diplomat.
Here, why don't I do decaf and you do?
Francoise, you see, we're a very
Okay, why don't I do
disorganised group, so you must be patient.
Well, that's lovely. I was told
She was
that
wearing very short
it was to
skirts
be on a kind of
and long
conversation
legs like
conversation level.
She was holding the
So,
horse.
and then now I've got that machine in front of me.
I mean,
You need some more water.
you don't wanna have a conversation.
I do have to grab it now and have the full dose.
Alors, un peu de silence, s'il vous
Yes,
plaît.
right there.
Isn't that
As an introduction for the reading.
What are you saying about us?
All right. Francoise, we are so grateful that you have come tonight to
Well-
the retreat and would help us
Nous sommes
more
reconnaissants.
deeply understand.
Well, I'm pleased because I really wanted to meet you all, and I didn't know when to come, not to disturb you, at what time. I knew at 6:30 in the morning would be highly suitable.
And we would be in silence all the time.
Okay, thank you. Well, it is a small group. Is it working already?
Yes, yes, it is.
Is it all right? Okay. Okay. Well, the subject has been given are the Quakers from around here in the south of France, really. The Quakers, you know all about the beginning of Quakerism in England and so on and so on. So this is not my subject. But you may have heard that we have been talking quite a bit, well, just started talking about the bicentenary. That house here was built around 1822. So we are just thinking of, what we are going to do, conferences, and one thing that you might find exciting, which we've got to plan. One of the things we want to do is to walk people, artists or painters or anybody, not only professional artists, of course, will walk around painting different places. You may have heard of John Woolman, some of you, and there's a book of John Woolman here, around here.
Henry Newman.
Henry Newman.
Oh,
Henry Newman.
Henry.
Henry Newman, right.
Sorry, I'm sorry, it's not John, Henry.
He was never
Henry Newman was in France in the 19th century. He was supposed to stay only 24 hours in Congénie, but he was with a friend who got flu. So, in fact, he stayed 2 weeks instead of one night and spent his time painting around the village.
Oh, we have seen, yes.
And then, so we've got the book, and we were allowed to use it. Here is it.
We'll pass this around.
That's right.
Yes.
Carnet de voyage.
It's only €20, it's the bargain of the year.
Yes. These are available in the Maison
And
Boutique.
And watercolors from Henry Newman, 1864, 1883.
I hope Henry Newman signed it.
Well, I'm afraid he'll have to.
No, he was a member of the Royal Horticulture Society and possibly introduced the secateurs back into England. Because you see a painting there of secateurs being used
Oh,
to cut
really?
the vines. Yeah. And so that's the French word for secateurs is secateur.
Is that what's a French word? Because it came through him.
I'm certain because he was a big cheese in the Royal Horticulture Society. Grand fromage.
Okay, we're coming back. But what I wanted to say is, well before 1822, there's Quaker activity here. Now, I should not use the word Quaker because they were not called Quakers until, just before the French Revolution, which was 1789, is only 1788 that became officially Quaker. So before, they had all kind of other names. But there are discussions among historians, they're not all in agreement, we have one French historian who is now ill and quite old, Jeanne-Henriette Louis, who came here many times and wrote lots of books. We got several books of hers. And she said that, she reported that historians can't be quite sure on how did the first people that we call Quaker now came about. The most probable idea is that Protestants were fighting the Catholics. In fact, it went on for a long, long time, practically from the time Protestants appeared. There was Catholics which were against that, and then there was fighting. And of course, the idea was to get straight away to the king or to other people to help the Catholic fight the Protestants. So in 1685, there was abolition of what was called Edit de Nantes, which was, if you know about it, yes?
Yes.
Which was, right, which previously allowed Quaker to meet, and they had not as much freedom as Catholics, but quite a lot of freedom at the time. And they could meet and they could gather and they could have meetings and they could have temple. That had been allowed by the King Henry IV, who was a Protestant. Pardon?
Yes, he was a Protestant.
He was a Protestant until he changed religion, because he was told that if he stayed Protestant, he couldn't have the crown. He couldn't carry on being a king. So it said, well, it's worth not being a Protestant, become a Catholic, and he became a Catholic, but became a Catholic officially. In his heart, he was still very much with the Protestant. But when that king, Henri IV, Henry IV, died, and that was in 1610, don't believe that I know a lot of dates, but 1610 happened to be the beginning of a book, which a history book, which I had when I was a little girl. I still remember that date very clearly. When he died, then there was another king, and then Louis XIV. And Louis XIV was he stayed on for a long, long time, and he was a Catholic who was told that, well, he had a life which was a bit of what they would have called a life of going around and having a lot of mistresses.
Libertin.
Libertin, yes, in French. And he had been told by some Catholic priests and so on, well, God will forgive you if you manage to get rid of all those Protestants from France, you will be forgiven. So this is what he did. He said, actually, I don't know very much about things, but I will do that. And he obeyed and did all what he could to get rid of the Protestant, which meant persecution, a lot of people being killed, and was pretty horrid. And it went on and on and on. And it's important, the very first Quaker to be might have been what was called at the time, 17th century, the prophets. Now the prophets they could be youngsters, they could be children, they could be women, and you remember in those days women were not allowed to talk in public, but their women were talking, or men, and they were prosecuted, if they were caught, they could be killed immediately. And young children also were prophets, mainly because it was felt that they would not be killed if they were caught. They would be put into a pension into a place to correct their bad behavior, but that's all. But anyway, that's what happened. Those prophets were hardly any of them could write French or at all, or read French. Most of them hadn't been at school. I think they were saying that I think only 30% of them could read and write. But it was admitted that they were speaking well above their level of intellectual comprehension. It was quite extraordinary. And at that time, they were prophets, they were Protestants. I'm not talking the whole lot of Protestants. What happened is that it went on, and then in the beginning of the 18th century, around 1703 to 1710, the Protestant became more and more fed up of being killed, being stopped, and they said, we are going to take arms. And they started going around and not only killing the soldiers of the king, but any Catholics around. And that was pretty nasty. Around here, there were some horrific stories of priests being caught and being treated in a horrific way. I won't go into those details. But so a group of those Protestants, and that is what it is important, decided, no, this is not on. We can't go on like that, killing others. Jesus would not have done that. So that small group wrote to the others, which were called camisards. They were soldiers and they were wearing la camisa, which is a blouse or a shirt. Yes. That's right. And they wrote to them long, detailed letters saying why they should stop. Even if they were going to be killed by the Catholics, they should stop fighting like that and killing and going from village to village, catching Catholics and killing them in a similar horrific way, I'm afraid, that the Catholics were doing to them. The letter arrived and was read by many people. Some people agreed, but the majority said, no, we started and we carry on until the Edit de Nantes, who give us freedom to meet. Until we get that, we will carry on fighting. And because of that, that small group said, well, we can't stay with you. We cannot carry on. We withdraw. We are pacifist, and we withdraw from your group. And soon after that, when they were in a meeting, because they were constantly having meetings, hiding in different parts in the Cevennes or around here in La Vonage, you've been to around at the top. Around there was lots of places, of course, where you could hide. And some of those pacifist Protestants were stopped and were due to be heavily fined, if not more. And they said quite simply, we do not belong to that group anymore. We are not Protestant anymore. We left them. And from that on, they were called a different name. They were no longer the people, the Protestants. They were called les Kouflaires. Kouflaires, which means koufl, which means be full of
the spirit.
Well, if you are big and generous, you will say that.
They will go more.
But other people will say they are full of themselves, of course. And they maybe they appear to be full of themselves, because today we would cringe to see, you know, coming, them rushing into a Protestant church or rushing into a Catholic church and say, you better stop what you are doing, it is rubbish, blah, 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 blah. So, of course, people didn't like it at all.
But that's exactly what George Fox
That's what he did.
This is I was going to say exactly what George Fox was doing.
Steeplehouses.
But what year are we roughly now?
Well,
What are
that
we talking about?
they about 1750.
1750.
50.
That's right.
Right.
50. Yes. They started the war, active war of Protestant against Catholic, started around 1703
Yeah.
Right.
and went on for about 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And this is during that time that gradually the group of pacifists left them. And by 1750, they were really completely separated and called the Kouflair.
Is it 15 ou 50?
1750.
50.
1750.
Yes.
50.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
And there was a small group, especially here in the south of France or all over the place?
I'm glad you asked that. It's important because this, I'm talking about Les Cévennes
Yes.
and that Lavonnage
Yes.
around here. It didn't happen so much. There were some Protestants, very much at La Rochelle, in the north of France and northwest. But really, that part, for some reason I'm not going to now, besides, I really don't know the reason. Nobody knows for sure. The Protestants were very, very, very a big group here. And this is why the king attacked that group especially. But so, yes, that was about, for about 20, 30 years, it carries on like that. And that group developed more and more until it became quite an important group. But that was mainly, and it started mainly at Congigny. There was about 200 Quaker families all together in Lavonnage. Now, Lavonnage is not very big.
The family, the Kouflair.
Les familles de
Quaker.
les femmes de Kouflair. Oui. Afterwards, you can say Kouflair, the Kouflair. Yes. So there was there is one chap called Paul Codognan, and it's important not to leave him behind because he was not an intellectual, he was not able to read or write, but he was a very, very, very strong Christian, and he decided to take his books, 1 or 2 books written in around here. He couldn't read those books because he couldn't read, but he took them to Holland, where he was hoping they will be printed. They couldn't be printed here. And he went to Holland, and then there he discovered there was in England a group of people who were similar in some ways to his way of thinking. So off he went to England. Of course, he had a problem. He couldn't speak French. He could only speak Occitan, which is a beautiful language.
Yes.
But the English people didn't know how to speak Occitan. So it was a bit of a problem arriving there and trying to explain that he came from France and so on. It was quite difficult. But anyway, he spent quite a few months, and the Quakers in England were very kind. And he came back. He had walked to Holland and then walked. Well, I suppose he had to take some kind of boat to cross the channel. And then he came back again, a bit of a channel, and then walked all the way down. Yes, he was walking all the time. There's no question of, hitchhiking, perhaps a cart from time to time. I don't know. But he came back and saying that, yes, he could say, yes, there are people over there who meet in silence most of the time, which was okay for him, as he couldn't understand them.
Non, on t'a tout dit. Je le dis
there was one thing which happened at the same time, and that was around 1785. There was in La Gazette. La Gazette was a newspaper, a very important newspaper. I can't be quite sure whether it was national or local. I got the feeling it was national, but I couldn't swear it. And in the Gazette, there was a whole page which had been taken by a British Quaker explaining that he was very sorry. He had boats on the in the channel, and these boats have been used to attack French boats. That was during the war which had been between the English and the French just before. And that man was saying, I'm prepared to give money back to whatever, to people who have been robbed or like that by my boats. He had 3 boats which he shared with 2 other Englishmen, and he was quite shocked. Obviously, he was not following very carefully what his boats were doing, but anyway, he sent his son. He was called Fox, by the way, which is, and he sent his son, and he said that he will be in Paris in such and such hotel, prepared to meet people and to give money to those people who could prove that had been really attacked. And so people said, well, will that happen? That is a bit of a joke, isn't it? And people here, around here, and especially in the town of Sète, which is not very far from here, were looking, watching carefully what was going to happen. And sure enough, La Gazette, a week or 2 weeks later, just said, yes, that weird Englishman has given money back, unheard of. But it has happened. So the Kuflais, which are around here, heard about that, and they wrote a letter to say to England, to say to the Quakers, to say, look, we don't want any money, we haven't had any boat or anything like that, but we are very impressed by what you've done, and we like to know you. So the letter went, it took, in those days, it took time, weeks and weeks, and it came back, and there was a letter saying, well, we would like to meet you as well, so some of us will come to see you. And sure enough, around 1787, I think, 1788, yes?
Oh, just before the revolution.
Just a year before the revolution, yes? 2 things happened in 1788 for those Kuflais. We are not yet Quakers. One of them is that the King Louis XVI was king just about, if you remember, he lost his head not very long after that, in 1793. So in 1788, he was still able to act, and he had power to act, and he agreed that the Kuflaya could have état civil. How do you call that, état civil?
Je ne sais pas.
You know,
Civil rights.
well,
État civil. Oh yes, they could have the same citizens' rights as everyone. Same status.
They could have status, yes, but specifically with the date of birth, when they get married.
They could be, yes, they could keep records.
They could keep record. Until now, the record were kept by the Catholic Church. And therefore you had to be
You had to pay as well.
you had to be a Catholic, you had to pay, and so on. And they, those Kuflaya say, well, couldn't we really have declared that outside the Catholic Church? And the king, Louis XVI, agreed. And his decision in 1788 was accepted. So it was quite a thing for the Kuflaya.
And, excuse me, and the other Protestants.
And of course, and the other
Yes.
the Protestant, yes, that's right, and the other Protestant. And there was something quite specific which was written that any sect or any group of people who wanted to have their life event recorded outside without being baptized by the Catholic Church could do so. Not only that, but people who were not religious at all, which was quite an event at the time, because you had to belong to something. And that we were becoming very close to the French Revolution.
Yes.
So this kind of freedom was more possible. So that's one of the things which happened in 1788.
Take a sip.
Some water.
Take some water.
Thank you. But also what happened, and that is quite colourful, is the visit of 7 Quakers. Those Quakers came from England, from Ireland, from the United States. And they came along, a long journey, crossing the channel, then coming in diligence, and then taking the boat on the Rhone, which was not an easy thing because the Rhone was not what it is now, domesticated. And they arrived quite exhausted, but after perhaps a 2 weeks journey, and especially those people, they were middle class Quakers, possibly only people with money could do that. But of course they were not like our middle class people would do. They would come with, with boots and the trousers, the dainty little shoes and things like that. So it was a bit difficult. Anyway, they stayed 2 weeks. They were welcomed by by all the people from Congénie, whether they were Kuflais or not. To see English people turning up like that everybody wanted to feed them, and they were well fed. Even poor people would do all they could to give them good food.
And they came specifically here?
They came specifically here at Congénie. That's right. Because for an extraordinary reason, practically there was lots and lots of families were Kuflais in Congénie, while only 2 or 3 in the village next at Junas, or the village of Aujargues, or Calvisson. There were a few, but not as many as at Congénie.
So this was the centre?
That was an extraordinary thing, yes. Why Congénie has been...
But it was.
But it was.
In this house?
Pardon?
In this house?
Well,
It wasn't built.
the house was not built then. So they were, they were sleeping in different houses and meeting in different places. There was, I expect, some kind of hall which was built in a village. There is the hall here which has been demolished 3 or 4 times. So we might be going back to the 18th century, I expect. But no, there was that was not built here. And after 2 weeks, all those people, all the Kuflais, all of them as a group said, we want to be Quakers. So that those 7 Quakers from Ireland, USA, and England said, okay, And we agree, all of you can be Quakers. There was no question of visiting and going around and asking, do you really believe that?
Faith and practice.
No, that was all of them. And with great delight. And there is some bits which I won't read to you because it is in French, which is when you see, you can hear from a rather superior, I mean, you would say today they're snobs. In those days, people saying, well, you know, they are not bad, but they are a bit rough, those people, those new Quakers. We will have to show them in time. We hope it will be a bit smoother, but for the time they're a bit rough. But it will be okay. It will be okay eventually. That was the attitude.
That is the 7 Quakers said, they are now a bit rough, but they will change.
Pardon?
It were the 7 Quakers who said
Say that-
they are a bit rough,
But
but they will...
it will improve. But they made a recommendation, some of them which were, you know, today, Quakers would never dream of doing that, saying, I've noticed you shut your doors when you have a meeting, you must leave them open. And after they're gone, the Quakers said, no, we are not going to do that. They had become Quakers then. They became Quakers. We are not going to do that because until now, if we left our door open, we could have had the soldiers coming along, just been decided, you know, 2 or 3 weeks before, that we got more freedom. But
Yes.
just in case, we better keep our doors shut. But of course, those Quakers coming from England had no idea of that, and they say you must dress like that, and the woman who were pretty little thing, no, you must wear all in beige or purple, this kind of, and so all the lovely necklaces and all that went off. That they accepted. What they didn't accept so much is to keep a hat all the time in front of her. They felt it was a bit silly. And most of them did it, but some of them did not. And this is where you can see that there was respect for those who did not. It was accepted that there may be some kind, among those new Quakers, of conscientious objection to that. So that's the situation. It happened. Now, the house here was still not built. And we are at 1789, the war happened. Just after the war, a school was opened here, a school for boys and girls, and that again was quite extraordinary. Girls were welcome with boys, and there was very few school for girls, and that it was a free school.
It was Quaker?
And run by Quakers, yes, yes, indeed. Yes, it was. And it was free for everybody except people. There was 5 or 6 children living further away, and they slept here. So for their keep, they charged a bit. So I don't think you know, no question of salary or anything like that. I think it was all on voluntary basis, really. Yes, and that school was so good that a lot of Protestants, who on the whole were not so keen about those Quakers who left them, admitted that, you know, that it was a very good school and they were glad to send their children.
Nothing changes.
Sorry, I have to go. I've got a rendezvous at 10 o'clock.
Okay, Jacqueline,
Very interesting.
but you know quite a bit.
Yeah, but I learned something new.
I see.
Good night, Jack.
That's a new thing.
Good night. Sleep
night.
well.
Bonsoir.
À demain.
Now, in 1822, as I mentioned briefly at the beginning, la maison Quaker was built. And how was it built? It was built, the ground had been bought by English Quakers. I don't know whether they are the people who came here, who just went round back home saying, look here, we better buy a piece of land for them. But they found the land and they bought it. But of course, there was not enough money to build anything on it. But the American turned up, and there was some money which was left for not only for German and French centers to welcome meeting for worship. And that was then in 1821, and this place was built. Now, obviously, different from now. One or two people asked me, well, how was it at the beginning? If you remove the ceiling, if you remove the doors here, it was just like a big church, like you know, as you can see from the outside. And it started like that.
Excuse me, this space here.
Yes.
That.
The whole space.
The whole thing.
Oh, both sides. So this beam was here, or there were two chambers.
No,
two
the
rooms.
beam the beam was built afterwards. When we demolished the wall,
Yes.
the place could have fallen. So they quickly put that up, and that I've seen it. Well, it was about 10 years ago only.
So sorry, was this the? So there were two rooms side by side.
No, there was not two rooms. There's one
Just
room.
the one. So this was the room.
This is a room.
Right, and
Going-
that was that it.
The whole lot, and it going on a little bit. Well, stopping here and going up to the front door.
Yes, I
That's
gathered
right.
that.
And no first floor at all, no kitchen. I don't think there was any loo as well.
To be a laboratory.
Yes, that was
So it's like going into church.
like a church. That's right. Yes. And if you walk around and you see the Protestant church,
Yes.
the Protestant church still hasn't got a loo in the place, and it is just the same. So it really was not very imaginative. It was just like any other church. There was several. There was a Methodist church who was demolished at some stage, and there was a Baptist church, and there was the Quaker church, and the Catholic church.
Wow.
So that, and the Catholic church, of course, had been built 11th century. So
Was it
What-
quite a big village? How many people would you say there were living at that time?
here, Tam, it was yes. Well, it was not as big as now, but there was, I believe, something like 400 or 500 people.
Well, then
No.
that was quite big.
It was quite
Then?
big, yes. Then quite big, yes.
And then 5
Yes.
churches.
Pardon?
And 5 churches.
4 or 5 churches.
And most of them Protestant churches or something.
And most of them, yes, Baptist, Methodist, Protestants, that's right. But somebody wrote, and then a little passage, priest Grégoire was saying, prêtre Grégoire, he was a Catholic, but admired the Quakers, and he said that Congénie was quite extraordinary village, because although people had all different point of view, and they were Protestant, but not all together, and there were some Catholic as well. Everybody get on extremely well, and you would pop in and borrow tools, even without asking, going into each other's houses. And
It's so fascinating what you're saying, is that the different Protestant churches, was the Quakers one of the larger ones or one of the smaller ones? Were some of them more substantial communities, the Methodists?
That's a
or
good question.
Baptists or-
Right.
Well, to start-
There were 200 families Couflair.
at the beginning, probably, yes.
Mm.
I'm saying at the beginning, because it changed toward the end.
Yes, so they were a large presence.
They were,
just-
yes. And the Quakers were extremely well known, and are still extremely well known. It may be a reason why we don't get people coming here, because they know us. It's quite a different point of view than in other places. There is a book here, which is Chronique la vie quaker française, which is quite a book with fairly lots of details, which, we got here. Those people who can read French can ask. We got it here, inside here. Chronique la vie quaker française. That's right. So, the 1822, the Maison Quaker was built, and as you say, was very quickly filled. There was people were sitting in a traditional way, but there were some kind of stages as well. People sitting at the top.
gallery.
Gallery, that's the
Yes.
word, yes. And of course, the more senior Quakers, although everybody is equal,
They were the elders.
well, they were put there, that's right, yes. And that went on for quite a while. And there were lots of visits from England afterwards. Elizabeth Fry came here and spent quite a bit of time here. And she was invited by the governor of the women prisons at Nîmes to come and give him some idea how things could be changed for the women so that it wouldn't be so bad. And then she went from that to the men's prison and helped quite a lot as well. And again, with a kind of naive arrogance, which we what you're doing is rubbish, attitude. And people accepting that. I don't think today, if somebody went in the same condition, there would be the same reply. But anyway, and by the way, we met here to our delight, Dennis and I, when we arrived and when we started, doing the best for the house to be bought by Assemblée de France. We met a great grandson of Elizabeth Fry, who lived in a village not by.
No,
And
amazing.
well, he lived there. He had been Church of England. What was it called? A kind of title, high up title, and he was in Cornwall. And he always said, "Well, when I stop doing that job, I want to go to the south of France and meet the Quakers." So he was delighted, and in fact, he was coming to our meeting for about 2 or 3 years. He stopped because he found.
What year are you talking about now?
I made a big jump.
You did.
I'm talking about that guy who is the descendant of Elizabeth Fry, and
And you
talking
were here
about,
at that
about 12 years ago. So that was quite different. And he had become, he was not a Quaker in England, he hardly met the Quakers in England. He met us here, and although he was delighted, we were not Christian enough for him. It was,
Yes.
Churchy enough.
he felt, yes, that was not, but we stayed great friends, it was delightful guy, really. And again, also full of naivete in a way towards religion. But anyway, that's, I'm getting, so,
Was Elizabeth Fry married?
that's Elizabeth Fry, okay, yes, and,
Church
yes,
in England? And what did she do in Nîmes?
yes.
That was a... No.
And lots of different people turned up. There was the family Benezet, who had escaped France just when the king was persecuting the Protestant, and he went to the States, and then later, after the Revolution. The French Revolution was a bloody affair, but nevertheless, it did bring some freedom from the Quakers. From then on, there was no question, all the Quakers, all the people, whether they were Christian or not Christian, and the Jews benefited from that as well. They were allowed to do what they pleased. And that, we tend to forget that a bit, because there's been so much horrific things, as you know, which happened. So the sad thing is that why did the Quakers number went down
Decline,
so
yes.
sharply?
Well, how was the community quite large even in the 1870s? Was it still continuing? in the 1870s?
Not
Sorry,
18 and 19th
yes.
century.
I mean, was it going right the way through to the 1870s, 80s? There was still a vibrant meeting here?
In 1870, there was.
Typically when it was...
It started, well,
You have
with
to listen to the story, Edward, is what happened. Please.
She's getting there.
Francois was getting there. You're jumping.
okay. Well, you know, we had different. After we had the revolution, and then we have another king, and then we had Napoleon Bonaparte.
And then you had 48.
That's right. And Napoleon organized compulsory military service. It was
under the Second Empire, Napoleon III.
What year are we talking?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Trying to get the date down.
What date are we now?
We are talking about
1810.
1870s.
no,
Late
18.
60s.
It was the last. Yes, that's
It
right.
was 1860s.
Yes.
Napoleon?
No, under the Second Empire, Napoleon III.
Oh,
And so towards the end of that was 1860, yes, 1870, the numbers started going down for two reasons. First is this service. That was quite horrific because that didn't mean not everybody had to go to do military service. The names were pulled out of a hat.
Yes.
And was it fair? Was it not unfair? But it happened to be often the poor people who had the name. It seems that the well-to-do people could buy themselves out, pay a lot of money, and get somebody else to take their turn. And sad thing is, at the time, if you were in the army, the chances is that you wouldn't come back. So that was quite horrific, really. With that, a lot, because there have been the war, a lot of unfair condemnation to death. From here, there was often the army coming along, the new French army coming along with some people condemned to death, who had to be executed where they were supposed to have committed the crime. And there was a man who came and it was slow because they were in a cart. So if they had 30 kilometers, it took quite a bit of time. And constantly there was mistakes and people were condemned to death. And Voltaire, some of you may have heard of him, who wrote a lot about the Quakers, actually.
Did he?
Yes, yes.
I don't know.
Dans ses lettres philosophiques. Oh,
Oh,
yes.
I've never read them.
He met, it's well worth it. He met Quakers while he was in prison himself. Voltaire got into prison several times, and he was in prison in England, and he met a Quaker there, and he was fascinated by him and learned a lot. And then when he came out of prison, he started digging to see what was those Quakers. And I think they were a bit naive. You think that they were very nice people, but a little bit balmy, really. But anyway, so the numbers, the Quakers, towards the end of the 19th century, really, towards the middle of the 19th century, started going down and down. And it was not only due to the military service, but also due to the Methodists. Now, the Methodists And I must say that my own family, who were Quakers at the beginning, turned up, became a Methodist. I think it was due to the fact that the Methodists were singing and shaking, and the young people found it a bit more exciting than being in a silent Quaker meeting. And many of the young, especially the young men going, the girls were left on their own. So what do? You went to get the boys somewhere else, naturally. And it was fairly sharp, actually. The number went down and down. And at the beginning of the 20th century, there was hardly any Quaker left. And in 1925, the last Quaker, a woman, had died. I met and I was friend with a granddaughter who lived in Congénie for quite a while and now has died. But that was a situation. So the house being empty, the British sold the house because, if you remember, the Quakers here were not independent. They were dependent at the time of England. It is later on that they became independent Quakers. Now the French Quakers are French Quakers. They are not dependent on England anymore. But in those days, quite naturally, the money went back to them. And they sold Maison Quaker, naturally. And that was quite sad. So what happened to Maison Quaker? Well, nothing very glamorous. It first became a barn, and then it became a kind of storage place, and a place where you put some animals, and so on and so on. Until the First World War, and then during that war, it became a little hospital. And you've been to that little Mazet where there were all those sculptures, didn't you? Well, the owner of that place, it doesn't go very far. Even though that had a mum who had been, assistant nurse in that little hospital. And she met the cook in that little hospital, and that became, they married, and he came out of that. So he has a lot of, was very friendly with the Quakers because of that. So anyway, little hospital, and after that, it became private residences. During the Second World War, it's a bit vague. The Germans briefly occupied this place, and nobody can agree what they did in a cemetery, in a churchyard there, whether they were responsible for moving some of the stones or not. But it is thought that they put some with some guns and some kind of other kind of tools of destruction in the cemetery. After that, it became private residence, and we had even English or British consul who used to be in Marseille, who came one day and decided to buy this place to start with, to be a second residence, and then they came and lived here. What one knows about, and I didn't meet him, but I met his wife, Madame Sutton, and then Madame Sutton was a madame. At the time, still, people thought of her, oh, Madame Sutton, as she was an English lady, very much a lady, and going on holiday in England, and perhaps not meeting a lot with the local people. I don't know, but everybody talked with reverence about Madame Sutton. Madame Sutton eventually got very elderly, and the place was sold, and it went on until it was sold to Caroline, which some of us know, lived across the road, and that was it. Then one day we lived here, and
And Caroline was Quaker.
Caroline was English, yes, English Quaker, and she lived across the road, and she put the house on the market, and it was a question of buying it at the time. Well, it's just a bit like now. It's not easy to find places here in Congénie. And she said, if you want it, you got to decide within a week. Because she herself wanted to buy something else. And she'd been told she only had a week as well. So it went from one person to the other. So we had to convince by phone, no internet at the time, convince back the Quakers that it would be wonderful to buy this place. Of course, there was no money. How are you going to buy that with that much money?
We're talking about
I'm talking about now 15 years ago.
15?
15, yes. Not long ago, yes.
2005.
2008, actually.
Really?
2008. So that was very close. And eventually, through phone conversation of different kind, well, some very wise Quakers, one of them said, well, let's get on with it, and if it has to happen, it will happen.
And we will find the money.
And we were a bit concerned, how are we going to find the money, which we borrowed and things like that, so we could pay Caroline, we needed herself the money. During the summer, Dennis and I, we went to England to see our young children, our young family. They were all married, and we hadn't left the children when they're young on their own in England. One Quaker told me, well, how much does that house cost? And Dennis said, well, so and so and so. You say, okay, within a couple of months, you'll have that money. And it will be a loan, but a loan with no interest, free loan, and Assemblée de France will only pay bit by bit when it can. And if I die before it is finished to be paid, that's it.
Wow.
So we could hardly believe that. But she asked at the time for it to be completely confidential.
I was going to ask.
So there was only Dennis and I who knew who it was, although after a few years, it managed to to sink in. We had a notaire who was quite her notaire. This lady lending the money come from a very wealthy English family, and the notaire was horrified at this kind of loan like that, and he wrote to us, "I never seen that before happening, but we just want to know whether you are a serious lot. I know you are Quaker, blah blah blah." So anyway, she was quite cross with him because he wrote that letter without asking her anything. But this is what happened, and the house now, as you know, belonged to the Assemblée de France. And at the beginning, there was really very little money to make the transformation, because we had bought the house, but all the work had been done, demolishing bits and so on. We had some other friends. One of them was a German, who was a great friend of ours when we were in England, Kurt Strauss, who had sold his house in Wimbledon and went to live somewhere else and had plenty of money. And he also gave us a lot of money so that we could convert
Brilliant.
the place. And not only that, but we asked all kind of people. It was quite a long time asking friends. You may have seen or been in one meeting where you received a request from a congénie meeting at a time.
So were you one of the principal people involved in the fundraising?
Well, it just happened we're there at the right time. Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. And it was quite exciting. And Dennis was an architect, so
He did the.
he did well. Yes and no. He was supposed. He was not a French architect. He had retired, so he couldn't be the one agreeing.
To sign off, yes.
Sign off. So we took another architect, who was perfectly hopeless. She had been recommended, but and then she had a nervous breakdown, and she had all kind of things happening to her on top of that. So really, most of the work was done by Dennis. And we had one chap called Axel Jensen, who is Danish, a marvelous man. He was clerk of Franciale meeting, and he was such a wise man, and he really supported us and helped us quite, and came. He lived in the southwest of France, a good 350 kilometers, and came very frequently to see what was going on and to help and suggest different things. And that was a great help. But there was such a support from Quakers all over the world, really. So
Florence.
That was the house in the beginning.
well,
This was part of the campaign.
that the house,
for
well, the big.
fundraising.
That's right.
That,
Well,
that made it as far as our meeting in Chicago.
really.
Ah,
Well,
That actual object?
Not that actual one, but one
No.
like it. Just like
we
But
could
the-
there were
make
lots
it-
of
we
these
could
little
make it
things.
I don't know
yourself.
that we found. I didn't realize it was still going on around here. It was there was a hole. It was too.
For the money.
And in 2008, how many Quakers were there in the village?
In where?
2008, at the time when this was
Well,
acquired. I mean, how many people were living here by then?
here in Congénie there was nobody apart from us,
Yeah.
and there was a little group. For 2 or 3 years before that, we lived in Congénie, and in a house we had a very big room,
Yes.
and we had meeting for worship every Sunday there for about a couple of years, and we had different people, like the descendant of Elizabeth Fry, one of them with his wife, and we had several people coming along as well at the time.
George and Louise lived here.
Pardon?
George and Louise lived here, no? George and Louise lived here.
Oh yes, Louise and George, yes. They came and lived, yes. And they came in. Several people died, in fact. Which some of them were older than I am, and I am not young, so.
So the Rue de Quéquer was
La Rue des Quéquers. Yes, there was a historian, Jean-Marc Roger, who lived in Congénie, and he, in fact, had said at the time that he was horrified because some developers were trying to buy the place and demolish the house, demolish the cemetery, and Jean-Marc Roger helped us quite a bit. He was not a Quaker, but his grandparents were Quakers, and he
so
did.
before this house was built, he was already
He was
aware of the importance of this building.
He was aware of it. Yes, he was aware. Yes, indeed. Yes, and there was all kind of conferences, and there have been quite a few conferences ever since, actually.
And he suggested to name this road Rue de Quéquer.
And he, because he was a historian, the village mayor asked him to find name for many new streets.
Oh, okay.
And he felt, and he changed that what was called before Avenue de Nîmes, which was a bit boring.
Yeah.
He called it Avenue des Quakers because of this house here. And next door, there was Quakers family living next door. And opposite, there was quite a few families, yes, in that street. That's why it is called Avenue des Quakers. Well, that's...
Well, that's wonderful.
well, it's...
Amazing.
well, no,
Amazing.
I tried to, you told me not to make it too formal, kind of conversation. But afterwards, when I heard that we had a historian here... I thought,
I'm not a historian. I'm just interested.
well,
May I ask you, the Parfaits, were they pacifists?
Oh yes, of
The
course.
Parfaits were as well.
The
Parfaits, the
Ah.
Albigensians.
the Parfaits, you mean talking about the Qatar?
Qatar, yes.
Yes,
They
yes.
were
They were
they
pacifists.
pacifists. That's
Oh,
what I
very
thought.
much so, yes.
So I wondered if there was a memory of it.
Well, we're talking about a guy, and I can't remember his name.
We know.
And he don't. Yes, we both know him, and
We both cannot remember his name.
and he did a lot of research on Qatar,
Yes.
and we became very friendly with a French Protestant pastor called Jas, Jas,
Yeah.
who himself was a historian
Yes.
on the Qatar.
Oh.
And he wrote a couple of books on the Qatar, quite serious, learned books. And yes, he was convinced that the Protestants, many Protestants, came from the Qatar. And I was asked whether I could reckon whether there were among the Qatar some descendants who became Quakers. And I did quite a bit of research on that. And it is quite probable, looking at names of people, it found that the roots of names are the same in quite a few cases. I had, for instance, a cousin, my brother, quite close cousin in fact, called Tolosan. And Tolosan is a Qatar name. And it, she was Protestant, and so it is quite clear. And quite a few names like that were found. And no, I mean, I am not a historian. I'm like you, interested in history. But I discovered that somebody else in Switzerland, who died now, wrote an article as well on could the Quakers and the Qatar have something in common.
Yes, oh no way.
Yes, and in fact,
and
they
our
do
friend,
have.
Our friend will know about this as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
well, it was him. He brought a group of people here, and it was about 30 people staying here, and he asked me whether I could do this bit of research to find out. And in fact, this is, it was quite interesting thing. That was about 7 or 8 years ago.
Another question, have you read Travels with a Donkey?
Yes.
Right, because he travelled through the Cevennes and he talked about the Protestant families, but I don't think he talked about Quakers.
No, I don't think so. No,
No, I just wondered if I was mistaken.
Chris. Sorry.
Come back.
Nearly.
Nearly.
Chris.
Chris. Misselbrook.
Yes.
Bravo!
That's it, thank you.
Oh, he was just here.
He was here
Misselbrook, he was just here
2
last
weeks
week.
ago.
Oh.
2 weeks ago.
Yes,
He
was.
knows everything on the Qatars, and he does study tours on the Qatars.
Yes.
Yeah, he's part of CAR.
It's
I had no idea.
Oh, Chris.
Chris.
He's going to be the new he's the new plaque of the Assemblée de France.
That's right.
He's about to become plaque of the Assemblée de France.
He's now going to be actually, yes. Assemblée de France #1, secrétaire national. Yes, and I'm delighted because he's a superb man, really, really lovely man.
He's also involved a little bit. He was involved with the stop fueling war against Eurosatory.
Sounds like me.
Yeah.
And in the, let's ask you one other question, because it's so
Yes.
informative. In the whole of France now, how many Quakers are there roughly?
Ah.
Yes. Well, how many Quaker are they? We are about something between 100 and 150.
And there's a small group in Paris?
Maybe about 15 to 20,
In
no more.
Toulouse or somewhere like that?
Pardon?
In Toulouse, are there?
Toulouse, well, I would have thought about the same thing, about 15.
So small groups.
They are small groups.
Is there a registered book of the names?
Pardon?
Is there a book of the names
Of the meetings.
of the meetings?
The names of the meetings. Well, again, there are two different things in France. We are association, that is legislation. You got to be, we are declared. You don't have to be declared. You can be doing your own thing, but it is much better to be declared as an association.
Yeah.
Now, l'Assemblée de France is a religious association, so it became association, which was declared, which in 1905. I don't know whether you're aware, but for a long, long time, the Catholics.
Well, yes.
Well, you've seen the Catholics ran from the 16th century, right at the beginning of Protestants' birth. The Catholics have been fighting Protestants, and in France, they've been bossing around everybody. I'm sorry to say that, but it was very much the case even in the 20th century. I give you an example. My sister's father-in-law was an instituteur. Instituteur means teacher, primary schools. This is what in the early days, the bright kids from poor family could hope to become instituteur. In order to go to university was another affair, but instituteur you could, and very bright people became instituteur, and he was one of those. And he lived in the southwest of France, near Pau, in that area, and he was obliged. He was teaching all through the week, but he was obliged to go to church on Sunday, whether he wanted it or not. And not only was he supposed to be there, but he was supposed to accept the priest condemning him and saying, and look at your teacher. Yes, he is a miscreant. He shouldn't be, he's not really believing in God. And, those kind of things, which are awful if you are a teacher with kids and the kids are there. And they it's quite difficult. And this happened at the beginning of the 20th century. Yes, until the 1902.
The whole thing about laicity has now changed.
Oh, changed, very much so, yes.
Yeah.
Laicity.
So the church
The church
is no longer as powerful.
No. The church is no longer at all. Many people, were afraid and so on. But in fact, the legislation changed at the beginning of the 20th century, 1901, 1902, and we, as Centre Quaker de Congénie, were an association, 1901. And it is an association which is not with a cult. Well, it is culturel, culture. It is for anything to do with culture. It is 1901, and anything to do with cult
As a religion, yes.
as a religion. And it's really a bit silly because we are both all the time. So
Yes.
they are the two associations.
Yeah.
and we really worked together. But it was done at the time to really free France from this enormous kind of, and the Catholic had to do like everybody else, you know, and the churches were being inspected. They received allowance, and the children could carry on going to Catholic church, Catholic schools, but they were really well inspected to make sure that things were okay there.
I've only got one more question of you.
Yes.
Between 1820 and 1870, when there was a golden time of this building, because the community was here before it started to taper off, are there any records? Did they keep meeting records? Did they keep, is there anything?
Well, I don't think so.
No.
I was told that in England, in the library, there are all kind of treasures which I ignore and I don't know, and I said I'll have to go one day and spend some time and look to see what is there.
So they didn't keep minutes.
Pardon?
They didn't keep minutes.
Well, I don't think they were keeping minutes at the time.
No, there was no sort of official Quaker business types.
But they would have gone to London if they were under the auspices of
When the place was aside, you see.
But if you phone to the librarian in a friend's house, he or she will tell you. If you ask them, they'll look it up.
Or they might even do, you can get it's almost a research project, isn't it?
No, but you could phone the librarian, darling.
We could ask the librarian what. Yes, that is true. Yes. This is something I've been thinking we really ought to do
for next year.
For the bicentennial. Bicentennial.
And what about inviting will you invite the Catholics and the Protestant churches to that? Will it be? Have you got a programme?
There's a committee.
Of course.
We're working on that.
That's the easy bit.
Yes, we for the 19 for the this 200 bicentenary. Yes, we are inviting. In fact, those things which are on the wall have been done by a friend of ours called Brigitte Deschamps, whose grandfather was a Quaker. She herself said she was an atheist, but if she had to become a religious, then she will choose the Quakers.
Well,
because she knows quite a bit about us.
There are atheist Quakers.
And in fact has been supporting us in many, many ways. And now, more than ever, because we got a new mayor who is not, well, the other mayors we had during the last 25 years were relaxed and sure of themselves. Yes. This one, it is the first woman ever mayor here. And I was delighted to hear that, but she is afraid of doing anything wrong. So we asked her one or two things which didn't seem to be quite right. Oh, no, I can't do that. And, you know, which is not so easy. But Brigitte has a way of, she was assistant mayor before, so she knows the mairie very well and she can help us.
And there would be records there too. At the mairie, there would be records, surely.
Well,
which mentioning the Quakers, yes.
Not of the minutes.
The commune will have records. Won't it?
I don't. They will have. Something about the building that they will have record of, but not about the minutes.
What we need to know
a
is
census.
what people
Would there be a census?
doing here. Yeah.
Remember, since 1901, separation.
Yes.
Between church and the mairie and things like that. This is what we've been hoping for, and this has happened. But as a result, no, they would not keep record of minutes. They would have record of the building and the planning permissions and things like that.
Oh, and what I was thinking is that when they have their meeting, their regular committee meeting, there would be, as a subject, a topic, a mention. There would be some record. I'm sure if they've got the records going back for, since the commune was founded, I would have thought that there would be some mention in the regular conduct of the commune. Surely?
Well, there'll be the deeds of the meeting house.
Pardon?
I don't know
Will it
whether-
be the deeds, darling? Anyway, this is
Anyway,
a
this is
research
just a
project,
thought.
so-
Well, it's something to ask.
It's Quaker studies.
Yeah.
Something to ask,
It's a very
yes.
interesting project.
Another interesting thing that's happening that's come up to the committee, the 200-year committee, whatever we call ourselves.
Bicentennial.
Bicentennial committee, is that it also happens to be the centennial of the Paris,
That's
Berlin,
right.
Geneva,
That's right.
all them at the same time. So we're trying to make it a full French
Oh, wow.
francophone
Oh,
thing.
yes, definitely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Celebration rather than just here.
I'm glad you mentioned it, yes, yes.
And
Great
they have
idea.
tons of records, but those are the records from 100 years up, not the records we're looking for, which are further back.
Yes, 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 and
Oh, what a treat.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so
Yeah, thank you
much.
very much.
well
Well done.
thank you very much.
I didn't realise you had such a starring role in making it all happen.
Well,
In
you know,
recent
it's
years.
I think we arrived here and we were delighted to see the place, and then when my father told me more, well, I knew a bit more. I knew that we had some ancestors who were Quakers. That I did know, and then I was able to dig into it to find, what happened. They were not. They didn't have any specific grand role. We had a friend, Brun, who in fact was very much a descendant of somebody who played a huge role at the very beginning of Quakers in the south of France, and she's called Brun, and she lives at Fontanes, not very far from here.
But you played a principal role in getting the house back.
Absolutely.
We
Thank you.
really wouldn't be sitting
It's
here.
not.
No.
It's
if it
not
wasn't
just
for Dennis
securing,
and
having the
Francoise.
building,
No.
but to have secured it and make it, possible to have this other life. It's wonderful. Thank you so
Not
much.
at all. Well, I think you probably are all ready to go to bed.
Yeah, we've worked to death over the past few days.
Have you been working to death?
Yeah.
I thought it was here forever.
Can I ask you about someone
No,
called Karina?
Karina?
Not that it was
Karine,
only
Corinna?
boards.
Karina, yes,
Karina.
yes.
She was here, wasn't she, for a time?
Karina,
Yeah, brought
well,
back
she
to
lives
life, so to
in
speak.
southwest of France, and she is interior designer, and she very much helped at the beginning. Yes, very
Did
much.
she?
Yes.
She came from my meeting.
Oh, did
Sussex,
she?
Yes.
Oh,
What
she's
is her-
super,